So first of all, thanks a lot for the invitation. And I'm really excited to be here because as I mentioned in our sort of intro chat, that I will be presenting work that I'm still working on, and I'm still gathering some of the data for it. So I hope I will be able to kind of delve deeper into it, but I'm looking forward to your feedback. So as you mentioned, I'm a postdoctoral fellow at the Center for East and Southeast Asian Studies at Lund University, and I'm currently working there on my book manuscript that is based on my PhD thesis. And the reason why I mention it is kind of that work is what led me to this topic of exploration, where I want to look at Buddhist heritage and the value that is kind of hid within it, and how it's transformed both physically and spiritually. So I graduated from University of Manchester last year, and my doctoral work was dedicated to the religious, economic, and social impact of the population and demographic aging in Buddhist temple communities in regional Japan. And I worked in Hiroshima Prefecture, living in a Buddhist temple, and kind of spending a lot of time in the north of Hiroshima Prefecture, which you can see here. And I documented the role of Buddhist actors in community preservation, and also the roles that Buddhist temple networks play in shaping sort of people's responses to demographic and religious crises. And I intentionally focus on community actors as well as Buddhist specialists to kind of capture the wider implications of religious institutional vulnerability in regional Japan. And one aspect of that vulnerability has been the question of Buddhist heritage, and its survival and its future as well. So although this material did not make it into the doctoral thesis itself, it is something that I have been working with, and it has kind of moved into my new project on Buddhist materiality. And it probably feeds this interest of mine in decline, decay, and survival, and things that can be salvaged or not. And this is particularly important because heritage designations are so prolific, including UNESCO World Heritage designations, and I think that signs for cultural properties, or bunkazai, accompany most religious sites, and those tensions between designations and kind of consequences of it as it changes the landscape and practices around it. And as Lindsay Weiss argues, heritage making refers to the processes through which kind of designated sites and practices are made into heritage by relevant stakeholders. And Eike Rotz and Mark Tuvin argue in the introduction to the edited volume on the sacred heritage in Japan, which I am part of, that these processes of making, when it comes to religious context and beyond, reveal these kind of complex tensions between the interests and the responsibilities of the involved stakeholders, ranging from local and national and transnational scales. And they take this argument further to kind of equate heritage making with a type of secularizing practice through which religious things, be it objects, practices, or sites, acquire new meanings as embodiments of national and also transnational culture and tradition. So we should really consider what that means for physical and spiritual transformation of Buddhist material heritage. And my work in many ways is preoccupied with religious community survival in a post-industrial society where kind of religious institutions serves as tools that help people negotiate and navigate social change within the society that they faced with. And it's an interesting story because in the book itself, in the chapter that I contributed to this chapter, I look at an example of a Buddhist. Sorry, too far. Oh, I didn't include it. Oh, never mind. So that's maybe even better. But I looked at the Buddhist statue that is homed in the local Buddhist temple in Hiroshima Prefecture that is really struggling economically. And I looked kind of at the value of that is being produced in the process of care for that Buddhist statue. So I was going to talk about the first object of the project. That first object was going to be sort of looking at this statue, but I'll skip it because in a way I've got less time than I thought so. But the other aspect, I wanted to contrast the example of this Buddhist statue in rural Buddhist temple community that is facing decline with the developments that are happening within the heritage preservation sphere relating to technology. So what the focus of the talk will be is the project that is called Superclone Cultural Properties. And the image that you saw on the poster, and I think the opening slide, sorry, there you go, and the statue itself, this is one of the first projects that they dealt with. But Superclone Cultural Properties project merges art, history, expertise, and technology to kind of create high-tech replicas of heritage objects, and that includes the Buddhist ones that we can see here, in order really to aid their kind of preservation and also facilitate access to cultural and religious heritage. So one of the first objects that the project has been working on is the Shaka triad Buddhist statue at Horyuji that you can see here, which is a World Heritage Buddhist temple in Nara Prefecture, Japan. And this cloning technology made me think about religious heritage, materiality, value, excess, waste, and also the economic implications of all of those. And I will try to put into coherent narrative today my thoughts around it. So I have previously looked at those socioeconomic challenges that I mentioned facing local Buddhist heritage, and the fragility of the local, often rural Buddhist communities that home it. So the work got me really interested in the value of decay and the notion of palliative curation. It's the term proposed by Caitlin De Silva, to describe processes of heritage care for the objects that are kind of beyond salvation, and they are too far gone. So the only sensible thing is to allow it to gradually decay. And at the same time, I looked at the case study of the Amida statue that I mentioned, and it kind of inspired this thinking around decay. So De Silva's notion of kind of palliative curation can, in the context of rural communities, can be applied to both to the community, but also to the kind of heritage within its care. But this kind of anticipatory sense of gradual demise that we see within the local rural communities appears to both symbolically unite community members and provide them with kind of the physical and psychological currency to strive for some kind of future where value is found in and in spite of the decay. So in a way, some of the heritage that cannot be restored, it symbolizes what the future of the community might be, and therefore people are sort of galvanized and mobilized to act against it. However, in case of the superclone Buddhist heritage objects, we are seeing a very different approach to the issue of decay. And it was that initial interest that allowed me to connect with the innovative lab research team at Tokyo University of the Arts, who are the people behind this technology, this supercloning technology. And the reason why I got in touch with them was to ask for their advice in understanding sort of the economic costs of restoration that would be required to maintain or restore the local Hiroshima statue that I mentioned and that I was investigating. And in the process, I learned about the superclone bunkazai, or the superclone cultural properties. So the Shaka superclone, as the Horyuji statue is referred to, is just one example of the team's sort of really fascinating work, but it is also a wonderfully exciting one to think through about the process of reproduction, labor, and value sort of encoded in sacred heritage objects. So I wanted to use it as a starting point to consider the complexities of valuation, production of Buddhist materiality and its excess, but also artisanship or technological and analog kind of artisanship that goes into it, and also the decay processes involved in this kind of treacherous and generative interplay of religion and heritage. So the superclone project began in 2013 with the backing of the Ministry of Education, Culture, Sports and Sciences, as well as various industry partners. And I think it's important to mention here that since we have the legal separation of religion and the state, in Japan, where the state cannot fund any of the religious projects, heritage is kind of where we can find some of the loopholes, and this project is funded by the government. The cloning technologies that were developed through it allow the researchers to create highly precise replicas of important cultural properties in Japan and beyond. There are other examples, but I focus on the Buddhist aspects here. So the 3D printing or otherwise cloning of cultural heritage objects is not new itself, but perhaps this level of restorative work is a whole new ballgame. So in 2017, the researchers first cloned the 1400-year-old Shaka Sanzonzo Buddhist statue representing the Shaka triad, that dates back to 623, which, as I said, is homed at Horyuji Temple in Nara. The statue, which holds a statue status of both the national treasure and is part of the UNESCO heritage recognition, it represents a seated Shaka Nyorai, which you can see here, so Shakyamuni, or the historical Buddha, who's flanked by two attendants, Yakushi, the Buddha of healing and medicine, to its right, and then Amitabha to its left. So a part of the Shaka triad, Horyuji is home to over 2,300 important cultural and historical structures and articles, including nearly 190 that have been designated as national treasures or important cultural properties. And in December 1993, obviously, came the UNESCO recognition for Horyuji too. But since the original sculpture of the Shaka triad is a designated national treasure, similarly to many other Buddhist artifacts at Horyuji, it is rarely accessible for public viewings to avoid its kind of further deterioration. And in 2017, when the researchers created the exact replica of the age statue at Horyuji, they relied on a 3D measurements and artisan restoration techniques, but they upped their game and the cloning technology evolved further. So we are now officially in the age of the Buddhist superclones, or, you know, so I think, but let's have a look. So you see the 2017 one, which is the exact replica, and then on the right, the golden one, this is this evolved technology. So let me tell you about it. So this evolved cloning technology goes beyond the practices of precise duplication, and with the use of the 3D measurements, digital modeling technologies, and advanced metal casting and woodwork technologies, this super cloned Shaka triad statue takes us back in time to the moment sort of creation and allows us to experience sort of anew the statue and also the deities and their affective presence and the splendor as crafted centuries ago by Toribushi, who is the assumed maker of the statue. So the original 2017 Shaka triad is a precise duplicate of the statue, which means all the time-induced decay and defects remained perfectly intact, whilst the superclone replica has the same shiny gold appearance as it was created in 623. So the difference is really staggering if you think about it. And the researchers merged digital technology like high definition digital camera, three-dimensional measurements, and digital modeling system to kind of recreate parts that have been damaged and cannot be measured. So it's not just copying, but it's adding, right? Adding elements. And they also drew extensively on more kind of analog expertise from art history, research, and handcrafting techniques. And as a result, they restored various elements that have been transformed or claimed by time. So, for example, lots of the chipped rahotsu, so the curls of hair on the head of the statue's central figure, of the statue of the Buddha, have been added, as well as byakugo, so the small ball of hair on the forehead, have been restored and appear on the replica. Another addition is actually reversing of the position of the two smaller figures flanking the Shakyamuni. The Yakushiji on the right is on the left, and the Amida on the left is on the right. So this is an actual alternation. But they found historical data to support that kind of modification, if you will. And they also added flying kind of heavenly maidens around the halo behind the figures, starting with the 3D printing prototype. And sorry, I've got an image that the researchers shared. So they started with the 3D prototype, and they also used really advanced X-ray fluorescence analysis of the metal composition and ratios in the metal parts to improve the casting accuracy, and eventually kind of finishing the superclone with its gold-plated appearance. And on the 10th of April, 2021, this superclone Shaka tríada was put on public display in its kind of timeless grandeur at the Nagano Prefecture Art Museum. You would think back at Horyuji, but no, it's located in the museum. So therefore also the access to the statue has been facilitated, and we have this kind of enhanced encounter with the past in a kind of secular space of a museum. So I drew on the kind of Shaka tríada example and the restorative superclone technologies to suggest that biographies of such superclone Buddhist objects are being sort of spatio-temporally transformed to generate alternative kind of socioeconomic afterlives of Buddhist materiality in between past, present, future, devotional on one hand and heritage worlds on the other. So let's break it down, and this kind of takes me towards my conclusions. So if we accept that the Buddhist objects have lives, they obviously have deaths, and material objects are meant to age and eventually decay. And I have argued elsewhere kind of anticipatory senses of gradual demise of Buddhist material objects is a marker of their value, be it symbolic or otherwise. So decay, in a way, accumulates value, even if this accumulation is a result of an awareness of kind of irreversible loss, material or otherwise. But these cloning technologies that I would argue are employed not so much to salvage Buddhist materiality destined to deteriorate, although that's the kind of rationale behind the lab's work, but rather they reconstitute their past lives of material glory. And this process of reconstitution is a challenge to the value we ascribed to the work of time and to the past. And these new creations allow us to not only question, but also kind of reimagine the value of the past while obscuring sort of the affective value of decay. So when it comes to the Buddhist kind of devotional objects, and the Shaka tríada definitely belongs to this category, the aura of such objects, and here I draw on Trines Brock's work, is not only derived from the sort of appreciation of the past lodged in the cracks and kind of tears caused by time. The matter is more complicated than that, and it is important, I guess, to consider that the processual and the relational value of such clones. So not least because of the kind of spiritual and karmic power that is released both during the encounter with and the circulation of potent Buddhist object, but also at the time when they're being created, right? So that kind of religious work or religious labor begins quite early on. So these objects contain spiritual energy and capacity for transforming people's lives. They are interfaces through which people can encounter the sacred. And at which point does a sculpture cease to be art or a product of supreme craft and becomes alive is I guess, part of the question here, and part of that tension between devotional and the heritage kind of aspects. And I'm not saying that they are in kind of opposition or contrast to each other, but there is kind of a shift in landscape that comes with the designation. Definitely there is a shift in landscape when we see kind of reproduction practices of this detail and scale. And Sumaya Venkatasan, in her work with stone carvers in India, shows how for the stone carvers, embodied gods become alive in the Hindu tradition at the point where their eyes are finally carved into the statue's head. And this moment of spiritual arrival kind of precedes any ritual treatment of the statue. And in Japanese context, to welcome the spirit into the statue also requires kind of specialized ritual care, so the eye-opening ceremony, kaigen. But what happens when the spiritually charged Buddhist statue, already imbued with the spirit, is cloned? So is the spiritual value or entity dwelling within the statue duplicated? Is it fractured? Is it reinvigorated and restored? Or does the spiritual kind of potential remain within the original statue at Horyuji, and the superclone replica on display in a museum in Nagano acquires a different kind, perhaps affective potential? Because if you remember the image from the museum, I personally find it really striking, kind of this experience of standing in front of this statue. I mean, we're not used to seeing them in that, the age statues in the glory and splendor of the past. So the value of such cloning technologies that enhance, transform, and also kind of enrich the material and affective lives of Buddhist objects can accumulate their own spiritual economic potential. And while they also articulate the rifts between devotional and heritage kind of oriented practices of care, they speak to the sort of broader themes of reproduction and copying practices in Buddhism that are designated to kind of create, transmit, and accumulate spiritual potential. So even though, and maybe I'm just thinking, am I out of time?
You still have about 5 minutes, Paulina.
5 minutes, okay. So just maybe last bit of comment on the research team that works on this project. So the researchers behind the superclone cultural properties, or at least the PR team behind it, they say that they intend to, and I quote, revitalize and pass lost culture down to future generations, and to create Buddhist heritage objects that are reproduced with the artistic DNA comprising the techniques, cultural backgrounds, and spirituality of the originals through artisanship and sensitivity. And Professor Masaki Miyasako, who led the creation of the replica, has been quoted saying that drawing on all possible research knowledge available to her and her team, she wanted to promote cultural understanding, helping people see what in the Asuka era, so from 552 to 644, what people of that time were thinking about the statue as the object of worship. So they actually intend to evoke this kind of spiritual these spiritual affects, right? In the audience, even though it is placed within this kind of non-sacred setting, we could say, or secular setting of the museum. So the aim here is to convey the original intentionality behind the heritage object. But another main objective of the research team is to also improve accessibility to such objects, which, due to their spiritual potential and also more practical concerns over their deterioration, often remain hidden from the public. And in a way, the superclones are a safeguarding practice and an extension of the mediation that takes place through religious materiality to facilitate the encounters between human and non-human beings that may otherwise be interrupted by the destruction caused by time, restorative care, conflict, and the natural disasters too. So there is an attempt here to bridge the tension between preservation and public display of devotional heritage objects. Is there something being lost or distorted in this process? Does some of the aura sort of the object evaporate in the process, or is there a new kind of emerges? And Trina Brooks, in her article on mass production and aura of Buddhist material objects, kind of recounts Walter Benjamin's argument from the 1936 book, The Work of Art in the Age of Mechanical Reproduction, where he argues that mechanical reproduction emancipated works of art from religious rituals and kind of evaporated the aura of art. But if we follow Benjamin's democratization argument, a question emerges whether granting access to cloned items removes some of its value simply because what used to remain kind of unseen is now on display or in common use. And I think I'm in agreement with Trina when she counters Benjamin's argument convincingly to propose that the value is not lost through democratization resulting from mass production, or like in the case of superclones, and kind of just granting access, because the spiritual value of the object is produced, defined kind of through interactions and also labored through people's faith. So it is relational in that sense. So supercloning appears to be a more specialized form of reproduction than what Trina was talking about with mass production, though that is then kind of carefully staged in a museum setting. And even though both kind of reproductive processes involve practices of value making and also kind of bringing the authenticity through labor, religious or otherwise, the supercloning is a mechanization of a different kind. So it slows down the process of reproduction, and value of the object derives from the process intense reproduction and reconstruction of the sort of original affects. And I think just to finish off, what is interesting, and I keep coming back to that, is that the location and placement of the superclones will also influence the kinds of value that people will ascribe to it. And of course, I haven't been able to go back to Japan and actually attend the exhibition, but I very much hope I will be able to come face to face with the statue. But there is this question in my head: so are such objects still efficacious, or does it not matter because at the point of receiving the heritage recognition, the value has already been transformed? So in other words, effectively, even if the superclone becomes kind of decontextualized into the museum setting, it possesses its own claim to authority. And this again raises a question of who in this instance are value producers and who has the authority and kind of literacy to generate it. And so by extension, the question remains for me, what kind of literacy is needed to kind of produce and recognize this value? And I guess what I'm trying to ask is, what is at stake here, and how the kind of afterlives of the original of the superclone are likely to be transformed in the process, as both people, the creators, but also the audience are trying to kind of reconcile the different kinds of value that emerges from material decay and renewal. So I guess if we consider the economy of such afterlives, those heritage preservation techniques are bound to produce material form and kind of spiritual potency, and also competing claims to efficacy and authenticity. Like, you know, which one are you going to choose for your devotional practice? Which one is going to carry more kind of spiritual power when you encounter the deities? Is it the old one, or is it one of the superclones? I mean, you know, the one on the left is a little bit less exciting than the one on the right. So, but you know, for some. But anyway, that's potentially the future of the Buddhist heritage. And I'll finish here. Sorry, I probably talked too long.
No, perfect. Just on time, Paulina. Thank you very much. Well, I invite everyone. You know, we're not that many people today yes, 8. So just feel free just to speak up and ask a question or make a comment for Paulina. If you have a problem with your mic, you could also write your questions in the chat. So first of all, thank you very much, Paulina, for this really thought-provoking talk, and I'm sure many monks must be puzzled by all this situation. So just to get the conversation started, Paulina,
sure.
if I may, you mentioned earlier that you lived in a monastery for a while, for some time, no? Did you have opportunity to talk to the monks about this? How do the cloning of sacred figures a mistreatment of the sacred object, or maybe they're just fascinated by the whole process and they don't care that much, I know faith in Japan is something very private and public at the same time. So I guess there's another way to see this all together. So well, this is my first couple of comments, and I invite everyone. Is that Diego over there? Hola, Diego. I invite everyone to to prepare and post their own questions here too.
Sure. Pedro, shall I take your question first then? Shall I?
Yeah, maybe that's better. So everyone has some time to think and reflect. On
to process. I mean, I apologize if the thoughts are not quite yet, crystallized, but tackle this. And also, I'm aware that I need to probably go to Japan, be able to go to Japan, actually visit the exhibition, and probably do some ethnographic work within the museum spaces as well to understand actually the impact of it. But back to your question about the mistreatment of sacred objects. This is an excellent point, and something that is really fascinating. So when I lived in Hiroshima, I lived in a Buddhist temple with a Buddhist temple family within the community, and kind of conducted work regionally, and those sacred objects in their care, because we're talking about this depopulation, the sort of the care for heritage of Buddhist sacred objects, but also the heritage objects that have been given a designation, but it doesn't mean anything in a weird way. So for them, restorative work is really, really important to be able to kind of keep it. But there is always a conversation, and this is something that also came from the lay practitioners who said, no, if we fix it too much, it's going to lose this aura. The fact that it's old is important. That's part of our identity. This is part of our kind of community history, because it comes, we know our community originates back to Heian period, when the statue was sort of arrived into the community, and we've had it ever since, and there are records to show it. So the kind of the physical decay of the statue, they talked about it, that was actually the marker of value. But Buddhist priests often have a very practical approach to this. So in rural context, getting your heritage object into museum context, so it's cared for, also financially speaking, by the municipal institution, is actually a good thing, in a weird way, the fact that it's going to be looked after and restored. But no one was talking about the, superclone restorative work. It's not even restoration, right? It's just kind of another level of identity creation for Buddhist heritage. But what is interesting for that is I talked to the research team, and I haven't been able to talk to the priest at Horyuji yet. So it's only a hearsay from the research team. But they say that they are having this discussion with the Horyuji priests. They have given permission for this work to take place, for the the original copying in 2017, and then the superclone kind of work, because they see it as an opportunity, to on one hand attract people, but also the fact that if we keep showing the original one, it's going to keep deteriorating faster than we want it to. But the discussion that they're having, should we have an eye-opening ceremony for the clone? So this is something that they are talking about. Is the spiritual, and this is a theological conversation, and they haven't resolved that yet. But there are members of the research team who are saying, well, we have to do an eye-opening ceremony because this is a new creation. And there are others who say, like, no, we just copying the spiritual potential that was in the original one. And there are others who say, well, actually, it doesn't matter because it's not a devotional object. We're just showing what it looked like. Like, it's kind of that tension is there. And I think the Buddhist priests themselves haven't really reconciled that in their head yet either, how that spiritual power travels. Because in a weird way, when we think about karma, it makes sense that we, I don't know, I would push them. If I get an opportunity, I would ask them, but what about rebirth, right? Isn't it part of the cycle? I don't know. So they see the kind of economical and tourist value in the object, but I think in terms of the spiritual potential, they haven't quite made up their mind. But have I answered your question?
Yeah. It's an open question. It's very open, and I think as you said, I met a couple of Buddhist priests in Japan, and they're very practical people. And
yes,
I don't know. At least the people I met, they wouldn't make a fuss out of this. But definitely, it's a theological issue, and also that's I don't know. It is really open, and I really love to see whatever the answer to you and know more about that. Hey, Paulina, there's a question in the chat.
Okay.
It's kind of long. Do you mind reading it for the record?
Yeah.
And
so that's from Maria.
Yeah, Maria Rios.
Okay, great.
Maria.
Thank you very much. Okay.
So yeah, so I will read out loud maybe. So later on, whoever want to watch this video will have an idea what it is about. So thank you very much for your presentation. It's a very interesting research. First question is if the original image is a hibutsu. Second question is if there are some interpretations about the transformation of the Dharma body, Dharmakaya, to other body, Nimana Kaya, or Sambhogakaya in this technological image creation. Finally, I thought about the technological work in Dunhuang caves in China, Sam Lab in Harvard too. Do you see some relation with this project? Really good questions here.
Yeah.
Please.
Okay. So in terms of hibutsu, it is a hibutsu object. So part of so the fact that it's not being displayed. And I remember I spent my first year in Japan in 2010 at Kyoto University, and we got really lucky because it was one of these years that happens every 7 years when they all of a sudden open the treasures and you can go and visit the temples and see the statues. So definitely because of its designation as national treasure, but also part of the UNESCO recognition, part of the items on the list for the UNESCO recognition, it is not normally displayed. And it's only displayed on important occasions. So in a way, the cloning itself is an opportunity to grant access and kind of mediate that sacred, as I said. So kind of mediate access to the statue, to its aesthetics, but also potentially to the spiritual kind of potential that it carries. But what makes that slightly problematic is that it's not on display at Horyuji, right? It's moved into another space. And I think that's an I mean, it's not really a controversial decision. It makes sense. I mean, Buddhist art encounters in museum, that's pretty standard in Japan too. And you have always special exhibitions cyclically. But that's part of the motivation, sure. And I think this this project is seen as part of that development. So opportunity to be able to show the heritage and art, because they also cloning, you know, Van Gogh and what have you. Like, they've been doing a lot of work, and they have also been partially involved in the works of the Zhuanghan caves in China. They have also recreated the destroyed the Myanmar, oh gosh, what they're called now. Oh, I've forgotten what they're called. But they have part of the Myanmar's Buddhist national heritage was also destroyed and during the earthquakes, and it has been recreated by this research team. So the Shaka tríada is just an example, but this is the first, the cloning itself, the 2017 statue, and I said that's kind of, yeah, part of this effort of create an exact copy of how it is now aged. What is new here? And I think it changes the conversation, is kind of trying to create it as it was back in the past. And I think that's what's different. But of course, it has potential for restoring all of the art, you know, the Buddhist statue destroyed in Afghanistan, and all of that work, as long as they have 3D imagery, as long as they have a video they can work with, they can actually do that restorative work. Or they can attempt it and work with the, you know, art history specialists who are part of the team, the casting specialists, carvers, and so on. Like, it's not just the high tech; it's also these kind of, you know, analog technologies that are really, really important. So, for instance, when they recast the superclone, they got the composition of the metal used to kind of 97% of error, because they kind of traced the, you know, the whole kind of chemical. I mean, I need to upskill myself in this area, but that's kind of part of the work. Is there some interpretation about the transformation of the Dharma body to other body in this specific context? I don't know yet, if that makes sense. It's kind of part of the work that I want to do. So I need to still delve into this aspect and kind of explore the theological interpretation of what it means for copying. In terms of what is already present within the Buddhist, Japanese Buddhist tradition, but also other Buddhist traditions, is that the practices of copying itself, it's actually meritorious action. So it generates karma. So copying images of the Buddha, tracing, and so on and so forth. Copying sutras is another part of it. So the Dharma teachings, that's part of it. Actually, well, on one hand, accumulates the merit, the karmic merit, but on the other hand, it also kind of passes it. So it allows it to be continuously reproduced and produced. So that part of practice is there. But on the specifics, on the embodiment itself, I need to dig deeper myself, if that makes sense. Does that make sense? Am I tackling it, Maria? Thumbs up or?
I don't know. Is there any other question or comment? I think we have time for one more. Maria Montt.
Yeah. Maria. Yeah. Elvira. Yeah. Maria Rios says thank you.
Okay. Okay. Great. Sorry.
I have a question. You've mentioned it like indirectly, but what have there been you mentioned like many people being involved, right? And like technology, and then probably you talk to engineers about the metal, you know, it's all a bit, but what has there been already a discussion on power? You mentioned it, but like who has the power to decide what is going to be done? You know, when is the ruin a ruin that you'll just let go? When you can actually reproduce it? Like is it the funding body? You know, like who holds the power? And who does not?
I think it's a really complex question. And I thank you for it. And I'll try my best to tackle it. Because in many ways, it will depend on the object, it will depend on the context. And I think when I think about the example of this statue in Hiroshima Prefecture, in a weird way, even though the head priest of that temple campaigned to get the city recognition, designation of the statue as the important cultural property, his motivation there was partially to, you know, if we do this, the money might follow. So we might be able to, restore it and care for it better, teach people about it, but also, you know, tourism opportunity, right? Are people going to come and see this statue? I mean, I'm not going to go too much into detail, but I mean, there is not much potential for tourism in that region, specifically in relation to that Buddhist statue. I mean, that's just not going to happen. And I think since the Buddhist priest passed away as well, communities, elderly, we're talking about 100 people supporting that local temple. That's it. And when you talk to them, in a weird way, the fact that they have this designation, the responsibility of care, because that's how heritage works anyway, is that it's the owners who are responsible for making decision around it, right? So, and for people in relation to that case from Hiroshima, they actually very openly talked about what they would agree to or wouldn't agree to, and they were trying to negotiate it in relation to the kind of devotional and the spiritual value that the statue has for them, and kind of the sense of belonging. You know what I talked about, you know, if we because members of the Tokyo University of Arts team, it was really lucky. I reached out to them when I was writing this chapter about this statue in Hiroshima, and the professor leading the project said to me like, oh, you know what, one of my PhD students is from Hiroshima. He's going back home for the new year. So do you want him to pop around to the temple? And I was like, yes, please. To kind of, you know, have a look and give you a proper estimate what it would cost, depending on what treatment and so on and so forth. Because I wanted to understand what kind of money are we talking about if we want to do this care. And the community couldn't afford it. Like even the basic care, they were just like, you know, we barely scraping it. So in a way, they making these decisions, and they have the authority to make that decision, considering that they also don't have the local priest because he passed away. So, and they actually haven't replaced him. So there isn't that kind of authority of a priest to make a decision one way or another or persuade the community. So they really kind of making it work and negotiate that value, whether the decay is important, whether we should, you know, even if we wanted to renovate it, can we afford it? Not really, so on and so forth. On the other hand, we have the, you know, high profile project like Superclone, where we have involvement of all sorts of parties. So we have Horyuji, we have the priests. They had to give permission for this project to take place. And obviously they have vested interest there. So, you know, preservation, interest in the temple itself. So the tourism and economy comes with it, of course, like part of the heritage structures, and that's always the case. So they have the authority to kind of, actually they technically the owners, them and their community. So the way it works, you would normally have a temple board and you would have the priests, and you would have a negotiation and conversation. What are we going to do? What can we afford? So in a way, it is a collective practice. But what is kind of complicated with this supercloning project is that it is a publicly funded project that supports, in a weird way, a specific religious community. I mean, a specific religious community that is both local but national too, right? It has this national symbolism. And there is a loophole there, the legal loophole. Normally, you couldn't accept any of the funding from the government for restorative care unless it relates to heritage. And that's a huge investment. And of course, another important element with this project is that they have a lot. They have like the whole list, I think 25 or something, industry partners. So you have the commercial aspect. They providing, you know, the kind of X-ray technology, 3D printing, all of that. They're actually using their technological kind of capital to invest in this project. And with that comes prestige and that sort of thing. They don't have influence in terms of how this statue might look like or what might be its meaning, but they are still a stakeholder, right, in that process. So I think it's a really, sorry, I'm really talking a lot, but I'm trying to kind of maybe show how complex and how many different stakeholders are involved in it. And there isn't like one central focus of authority, because you also have the researchers, right? These are the guys who are doing the groundwork. And for them, that's part of their kind of, you know, professional expertise. And they are obviously invested in heritage preservation efforts. That's part of the work. Art historians, and dealing with on one hand, dealing with the sort of maybe, I don't know, the professional fascination, right? What can we do? You know, we can apply this knowledge. We can really do something innovative here because there is technology and there is funding that we can use and draw on this. But on the other hand, they are very often also experts in heritage kind of decision making. They are the ones who are called upon to make decisions, to write UNESCO heritage applications, to make kind of bids for what should or shouldn't be recognized as such. Like we see it with the case study, like in this book, there is Ian Reader, who works on pilgrimage in Shikoku. He writes about how actually a lot of Buddhist priests on Shikoku Island are opposed to the whole UNESCO recognition, because if we get the UNESCO recognition, you know, if my community becomes elderly, I can't change my stairs to just make them practical because they will aesthetically not fit, right? So that negotiation of aesthetics, economics, community, kind of external, because in a weird way with UNESCO comes the prestige, but not necessarily the economic support. So it's just it's a minefield. I don't know.
Thanks. No, but very interesting.
Yes, Paulina, we are reaching the time now to thank you again for your presentation. I think this is, I second Nicole Jen, who says in the chat that this was really interesting, and we learned a lot from you today. And I really, really hope that we will have the opportunity to host you again, hopefully in person. In our
that would be amazing.
And
I'll work on my Spanish. I'll work on my Spanish.
Yes. That would be good. Or we can all learn Japanese or whatever. And,
that's true. But there's a quick question from Matilda. It's a very
Matilda,
brief one.
yes, I missed it then.
I just want to. She's just asking.
Maybe we can close now and for the video, and then keep Matilda your question for the.
Yeah.
So we close and we allow people who have to go for the classes to go, and we can still stop here. If that works for everyone.
Sure.
Yeah. So thank you very much, Paulina, and we hope that we'll see you again soon. So thank you very much.